Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, U.S. President Donald Trump signs an order on new steel and aluminum tariffs, which draws flak from both trading partners in Europe, South America and Asia. Could the new U.S. duty indeed trigger a trade war? And Mr. Trump and Mr. Kim, they are going to meet as early as May, according to South Korea's top security advisor. Is this the diplomatic milestone that could lead to denuclearized Korean Peninsula? How far is it? U.S. President Donald Trump lost no time in seeking new tariffs. On Thursday, Mr. Trump signed off on the steel and aluminum duties he announced last week. They could go into effect in 15 days, signaling a sharp departure from a decades-long U.S.-led drive for more open and less regulated trade. The U.S. president declared that America had been so-called ravaged by aggressive foreign trade practices. Take a look.
U.S. President Donald Trump said no one should be surprised that he signed off on new tariffs on steel and aluminum. He said it was a campaign promise, and he's now delivering.
Our factories were left to rot and to rust all over the place. Thriving communities turned into ghost towns. You guys know that, right? Not any longer. The workers who poured their souls into building this great nation were betrayed. But that betrayal is now over.
The new duties amount to 25% on foreign steel and 10% on imported aluminum. Workers from both industries attending the White House signing on Thursday welcomed the move. They said they hoped it'll resurrect Made in America metals, their metals. But critics warn the move could spark a worldwide trade war. More than 100 Republican lawmakers, many of them Trump supporters, sent the president a letter on Thursday, urging him to reconsider.
A generalized tariff that would actually harm allies, harm American consumers, by the way, harm American workers that use steel in production, hurting their competitive nature in global markets as well. I'm opposed to that.
Trump said the U.S.'s neighbors to the north and south, Canada and Mexico, will be exempt, pending ongoing trilateral trade talks. Both had heavily lobbied the administration in recent weeks. He also suggested there might be some flexibility for Washington's other, quote, friends. That's unlikely to include Beijing. China is the world's biggest steelmaker and has been seen largely as the target of these tariffs, even though Chinese steel accounts for but a fraction of U.S. imports.
The new steel and aluminum duties did not sit well at all with top U.S. trading partners. The European Union and Brazil warned they will take measured action against the tariffs. Japan and South Korea also said that they would seek exceptions. The world's second biggest economy, China, was also vocal in its opposition, warning the tariffs would, quote, have a huge impact on the normal international trade order. I talked to Mr. Li Baodong in an exclusive interview. Mr. Li is China's vice foreign minister. This interview is about China's reaction. Mr. Li said it takes two to tango to smoothen bilateral relations, just like a dance, to avoid stepping on each other's toes. So it seems that there's something more serious that is already beginning.
We do not want to see trade war happening in the world. That will have, I think, negative impact on global trade, on the growth, and so I think this is a zero-sum game.
So how is China going to handle the unpredictability?
Our policy is very consistent, and there are always, ups and downs in the Sino-U.S. relations, but still have confidence. In this relationship, because I think the mainstream of the two countries, want to maintain good relations with each other. Nobody can act alone, address alone, so we got to work together. I think that Sino-U.S. relationship, I think we can work out.
Wonderful.
We
Great
can
to
work
hear.
out. You know, through consultation, but that there must be joint efforts. And so far, China is concerned, we are ready, and we are there, and we want actions, you know, taken also equally, and by the other side. It's just like, you know, dance. So if we move together, you know, we can have a dance. If we cannot move together, you know, you have trouble. Stepping on others' toes. Yeah.
So the new U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum, the sign of worse things to come. Let's turn to our panel. We have a very strong panel in Beijing. Cui Hongjian, Director of the Department for European Studies, China Institute of International Studies in London. Ian Begg, a Professor Dorio, Research Fellow at the European Institute of London School of Economics and Political Science. In Brussels, we have Daniel Groh, who is the director of the Center for European Policy Studies, and in New York, invited Max Wolf, professor of economics from New School University. Gentlemen, I want to welcome to the four of you, even though this is not necessarily a good news. But let me go to you, Professor Wolf, from the United States, briefly helping us to understand, is this the start of worse things to come?
Yeah, so we're very concerned that it might be. I think the way we see it might be a little bit different than some of folks around the world, which is this is mostly a fake industrial policy with real consequences. What we have here is mostly political theater designed to strengthen a president with what is left of his base and to sort of throw a bone to ideological forces that have not been successful but have become somewhat resurgent lately since 2016, masquerading itself as a coherent international policy and unfortunately likely to risk or entail blowback. And I think what we're most concerned about is even before we saw the signature, let alone the 15 days still to wait before these go into effect, we've had a chill in global cooperation and a rise in global heat already.
Okay. Mr. Groh, the European countries. Not exempted so far, but the worry is whether the European countries are running after the exemptions rather than working on the rules of international trade.
Well, they will probably do both. They will running after having an exemption, and that might be everybody by himself, and that's exactly what Trump likes. Everybody comes to him and says, please, Donald, can you make an exemption for us? We'll be nice to you. But in the end, if he doesn't do it, then of course the EU will react, and probably will react as it always does, because it wants to be predictable, not like Donald Trump. And therefore, if the US sticks to the announcement as of today, then there will be countervailing actions by the EU.
The European Union could end up the biggest loser, of course, according to some statistics. The strange thing about the U.S. tariffs is that they could punish U.S. allies more than the country that Mr. Trump has singled out most often in his protectionist rhetoric, China. If you take a look at the numbers we have on the screen, you would have an idea as to what I really meant. So, Professor Begg, given that is the fact, what exactly are we talking about? This is a political battle, but to what extent can they win in a way, the chips for President Trump back at home?
Well, I think we've heard it already from Mr. Wolf that it's trying to deal with his own supporters. I looked up the numbers just before coming to this program, and the total employment in all primary metals industries in the US is just 380,000 out of a workforce, non-farm workforce of 143 million. So we're talking about a relatively small segment of society. And also, as has already been emphasized in your package, what's going to change is that the users of these primary metals will find them more expensive. So what a steel worker or an aluminium worker might gain, a car worker in another part of the US might lose in potential sales. So it's just crazy economics.
We hope many of those voters in the U.S. could watch our program so that through your wonderful analysis, gentlemen, they will get a better idea of what they are embracing right now. But for now, I want to go to you, Mr. Cui. Of course, at the very beginning, President Trump talked about China, 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 and China. Of course, China is not significant on the list when it comes to providing both aluminum or steel to the United States. Having said that, though, China is concerned about so-called order. What kind of order is China mostly concerned about, Mr. Cui?
Yeah, I think firstly, yes, compared with other, very important.
All right. So what kind of order?
I think now the order means for China is, once this thing happened, like in this way, which means that there will be some, different rule outside of the WTO or some other related order trade system, just like President Trump used. What will happen is some other countries, some other economies, they have to follow it. And then, of course, as a bigger economy, as a bigger, manufacturing country, there will be also another suffering for China. Is as we know that once there is a bigger increase.
I have to interrupt you for now because we got breaking news coming in. My producer is feeding me through the earpiece that Chinese President Xi Jinping was earlier on the phone with U.S. President Donald Trump talking about the situation, the latest situation on the Korean Peninsula, and also the relations between the two countries. Once again, we want to inform you, Chinese President Xi Jinping was earlier on the phone with U.S. President Donald Trump talking about two issues. One, the latest development on the Korean Peninsula, namely the denuclearization issue. Secondly, the bilateral relations. We'll get to you when more details are coming in. You're watching CGTN. Let's come back to our discussion, which also has a lot to do with the bilateral issues. As the two presidents just discussed, we do not know the details yet, Mr. Cui, about exactly what they discussed. What could be the result after their discussion? We don't know how much it is in relation to the trade issues we just talked about. But let's continue our discussion. The order that you are concerned about, as you said earlier, is not just about the steel and also aluminum, but rather setting a precedent using domestic rules to deal with international trade issues, which should be dealt on a multilateral platform such as the WTO. So, Mr. Wolf, Professor Wolf, is that a dangerous precedent to the United States as well, if we take a look at it?
So absolutely. Part of the reason that more prudent policy minds had urged against this, in all regards, is basically twofold. One is the policies that we're now implementing are the wrong policies by many expert opinion, and we're also going about it in the wrong way. So it's sort of a double problem, but the issue here is that everybody ultimately loses from a breakdown in global rule setting. And it took us 20 to 25 years to build a fragile network or rubric for cooperation. Unfortunately, it can be torn down much more quickly. Unilateral action with various countries looking for unilateral solution threatens to crack the global order, which has brought us whatever prosperity and stability we have enjoyed celebrating for the last 25 to 30 years in our global trade order.
We could criticize, but Professor Begg, is this the beginning of President Trump's strategy to work? In a way, I mean, to make sure things are not going to happen on the multilateral platform. It's only happen on a bilateral platform. We're using domestic policies regarding international trade issues. And are we going to see more to come? And as a result of the U.S. still being one of the biggest markets in the world, will others follow suit, such as beginning from steel and aluminum? Professor Begg.
I think it's unlikely we will see a full-scale trade war.
Why not?
And the reason for saying that is that what tends to happen is that all U.S. presidents have tried this little trick before. Obama did it, George Bush did it. They react to a particular constituency and say, we will try to do something for that constituency. But then other voices, and we heard this already in your program, 100 Republicans saying this is a bad idea. You will find all kinds of objections surfacing. The fact that his economic advisor has resigned over it, that really ought to be the big news in this, because that's saying the administration doesn't believe in it, other than the president. The checks and balances in the U.S. system should not be underestimated, as we saw even 15 months ago when Trump tried to ban Muslims coming into the United States. That was rapidly stopped.
But we want to believe the system, yet will the system really produce a satisfying result? That's always a question mark. Mr. Grohl, here's the thing. Steel and aluminum could only be the very beginning of something. We don't know how to characterize this thing yet because we don't know what's to come. Yet, this could go to IPR issue. This could go to other items when it comes to international trade. This could go to issues related to overcapacity, but this could also go to issues that has nothing to do with it. So that is the danger, this uncertainty. The key word is uncertainty, Mr. Groh.
Yes, I'm actually more pessimistic than Ian Beck because we're not dealing with a normal administration in the sense that the president ultimately tries to act in the interests of the country. But here we have an area also where the president by himself can decide a lot. The travel ban, for example, needed legislative support from Congress, which he didn't have. But on trade policy, the president can do a lot in the negative sense, stopping exports or raising tariffs. And I think he has seen that by doing so, he gets more power, he gets more exposure, and the entire philosophy which Trump has espoused now for more than 20 years is, if you have a trade deficit, you should do something about trade until the deficit goes down. Now we know from economics, but increasing tariffs, you don't get a lower trade deficit.
Right.
So what I foresee is that he might be doing one thing after another. The trade deficit doesn't go down, and we might be going down a very protectionist route in the United States.
Okay, Mr. Wolf, is that also your concern?
Absolutely, and I think one of the ironies is if we don't take this seriously, we're more likely to have the worst possible outcome. If we do take it seriously, then we take action and surface debates and issues which help to prevent the worst case from coming.
Okay, here's the thing, Mr. Cui. What if worse to come? I mean, China said this is breaking the order. So China also said it's going to take a responsible and reaction in a way, justified reactions. That is coming from the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Of course, today the Commerce Ministry also indicated that this is breaking the order. And earlier we heard from our exclusive interview on CGTN with the Vice Minister of Foreign Ministry here in China. Mr. Li Baodong talked about it takes two to tango, China ready to talk, but the other side shouldn't step on the toes of China. So is the other side, according to the Chinese standard, Mr. Cui, already stepping on our toes? And if stepped on our toes, what will be done?
So I think firstly, for China, it's also a very serious, issue. Even China is not at the top 5 or top 10, target by this bad measure by the United States. But I think firstly, China needed to calculate what will happen after this, bad issue, and also at the same time.
You mean what will happen to China's domestic industries regarding aluminum and steel?
Exactly.
Okay.
Even for the steel aluminum itself, China is not the top 5 of the exporter to United States, but there are so many related sectors. If we understand how about the related sectors, how they're suffering from that. And secondly, I think China still should try to have some more joint effort with some other partners, including European Union and some other, to have a tough stance on this measure by United States, because we are living in a community.
Something you heard from Mr. Groh earlier, he already said it very frankly. He's afraid that people are doing both things, that on the one hand, trying to fight against the United States, at least on this decision verbally, rhetorically, maybe with some reaction. On the other hand, trying to look for so-called exceptions.
Yes, exactly.
Exceptions, rather, sorry.
Exactly. So that's the reason why now we are facing a very complicated situation.
Right.
So I think it depends on how could we do something more positively. Right. For example, now even I understand for some European countries, they are still waiting for the opportunity to be exempted by the United States. But I think it's just a very, very, cold word, logic or philosophy. Because maybe next time you will be a victim.
All right,
maybe this
Mr.
time
Beck,
you're lucky.
Mr. Cui already illustrated all the logics that you should be fighting for your own rights as well as that of all the others. Mr. Beck, what about that?
Well, yes, every country in this game is going to try to maximize its own welfare from this.
Sure.
But the reason I mentioned crazy economics before is that the way this works is that you specialize as a country in the things that you do best. Let's face it, the US is not best equipped to make steel or aluminium. It's better at Microsoft or the other things in which it specializes, aerospace. And if you start to break into that kind of specialization, people are going to realize that you are concentrating on the wrong things for a very narrow political advantage or a very small segment of Trump supporters. And that's why I think that more wise heads will prevail on both sides of this. There may be some little tit-for-tat responses by the Europeans, maybe also by China. I heard the story possibly that the Europeans would try to ban Harley-Davidson motorcycles, which will cause the upset of the Hells Angels in the US. Then what? But I think these are marginal differences to the trading system.
Right. A lot of rock and roll musicians might not be very necessarily happy about that decision about Harley-Davidson, by the way. But let me go to you, Professor Wolf, before we go. You know, what's next? In terms of a U.S. policy, this could be a sporadic case. This could be the beginning of a series. What about the political infighting going on within the U.S. in a midterm election year? Which is going to prevail?
Yes, so I think if we see a very major repudiation of particularly the more comfortable Republican candidates in the midterm elections, which, keep in mind, isn't until November, then there might be intense pressure against the populist Trump notions inside his own party, as well as more curtailing of his legislative agenda by an opposition party. Folks should keep in mind that for very unusual in American history, we have a Republican president, a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a sort of majority Republican Supreme Court, which makes me a little bit less nervous, a little bit more nervous, I think, than some of my colleagues about our checks and balances, because they're at a low ebb in their functionality. And that is part of why we're seeing things go further, even if they don't go all the way, than they historically have. But so my big concern here is that this works in the calculus of the present regime, and so we see more of it and bigger of it, and that it occasions a similarly irrational and angry response around the world, because then we get onto a slippery slope where cooler heads will sort of speak in vain, and that's the big risk. That
is the big risk. Whether the checks and balances in the legend that really works, we better check the news to know the truth, hopefully. For now, I want to thank the four of you gentlemen for being with us. We wish you all a great weekend, no matter what is happening right now when it comes to trade. Cui Hongjian, Ian Begg, Daniel Groh, and Max Wolf, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Wei.
Thank you. Stay with us here at World Insight. Still to come on our program tonight. South Korea calls it a diplomatic milestone, Mr. Trump to meet DPRK leader Kim Jong Un as early as May. What this means for efforts to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula right after this break. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. We just got the word, as I mentioned earlier, Chinese President Xi Jinping has made a phone call to U.S. President Donald Trump to talk about the Korean Peninsula situation and bilateral relations. Once again, the two presidents coming from China and the United States talked on the phone on two issues: Korean Peninsula situation and bilateral relations. Earlier, South Korea's top security advisor has announced that Mr. Trump will meet the DPRK leader Kim Jong Un by as early as May. A deal to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula tops the meeting's agenda. South Korean National Security Advisor made the announcement at the White House after briefing Mr. Trump on the South Korean officials' meeting on Monday with Kim. Chung said that DPRK leader is committed to denuclearization. If or when the meeting happens, it's going to be certainly a big step towards the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Where is China in all of this? Where is China in this diplomatic milestone? I asked Mr. Li Baodong in an exclusive interview. Mr. Li is the Vice Minister of China's Foreign Ministry, and it is on the sidelines of the two sessions. Here's the words coming from the Chinese diplomat. What do you make of this latest development?
So we hope that the meeting, can keep the momentum of peace talk, and also that will, make contribution to maintaining peace, stability in this region. Thank you very much.
Many wondered, Vice Minister, just before we go, whether China is going to be still a significant player on the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula. What do you think?
China is, always very active in maintaining peace, stability in this region, because DPRK is our neighbor, and so we have made tremendous contribution to bringing all players together. So I think we are very happy to see that the meeting will take place.
But what will be China's role? I mean, leading up to April, for example, during the military exercise, and then for May, maybe there's a meeting taking place.
We'll keep asking them to sit down and to talk with each other, to address their own problems, through talks. Thank you.
For more on the summit between Kim Jong Un and Donald Trump, I mean the possible summit, we are joined in our Beijing studio, Mr. Zhao Tong, who is an associate at the Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy. Welcome, sir, to our program. Also joining us in Washington, D.C., Jim Walsh, who is a senior research associate of the Security Studies Program at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who's been doing research on denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula for a long time. I want to welcome the both of you. A lot of news coming in. I want to brief you a little bit. Earlier, as we said in a program, the two presidents coming from China and the United States already talked on the phone on Friday. They talked about two issues: Korean Peninsula denuclearization, and the other is bilateral relations. Let me read this in Chinese, though, the details. I try to translate to the extent that I can. The U.S. President Donald Trump has been saying to the Chinese side, Mr. Zhao, that what Chinese President Xi Jinping and the Chinese side have been saying, which is to resolve the issue between the United States and North Korea through dialogue, is the right idea. He also said the U.S. side really appreciate and also put big emphasis on the role of China when it comes to the issue of the Korean Peninsula, and would love to closely interact and communicate with the Chinese side. Your response to the words coming from the U.S. President?
Well, I'm really amazed by the fact that President Kim Jong Un would give credit to China and to President Xi Jinping himself by pointing out that the insistence by President Xi on dialogue has been the right approach. It's amazing that he could...
This is President Trump, rather.
Right. He could give credit to any other person than himself. So that really tells something. He really believed that this approach of seeking dialogue, starting with some tangible results, is the right approach. So.
On the other hand, Mr. Walsh, of course, the Chinese President Xi Jinping, also very gentleman, he suggested to the U.S. President Donald Trump that the Chinese side really appreciate the active and the positive will coming from the U.S. President to peacefully resolve the Korean Peninsula issue through political means. He also iterated that China hopes the United States and North Korea could, as fast as possible, to begin interaction dialogue, to begin that process, and also to strive for a positive outcome. I'm trying to translate right now through the Chinese into English while I'm reading the scripts. So maybe some of those are not necessarily 100% correct when it comes to accuracy, but it is the meaning that we're talking about here. You see a lot of mutual appreciation going on over there, Mr. Walsh.
Yes, and I think this all stems in part from the fact that President Trump is not a policy president. He's not an ideological president. He can pick and choose different positions on different issues, often to the anger of his own party. And what matters to him is personal relationships. And I think going back, and you and I have talked about this, Ian, going back to that first Trump summit with Xi, they established something there that Donald Trump felt positively about China. This is not the first time he said something positive. So I think it's been built on his personal assessment of the Chinese leader. We'll just have to see if that continues. Most of the time you need more than that to make policy work. And the president, you know, one thing about living in the U.S., it's never a dull moment. It's always something new, and certainly no one saw this coming.
Of course, the Chinese President Xi Jinping also suggested in the phone call, Mr. Zhao, that the Chinese side believe as long as we are looking at the political solution to the Korean Peninsula issue, the issue will be resolved and moved toward the right direction. He also said this, he hopes all sides would give some positive signs to the other side so that to avoid anything that could hamper the development of positive signs when it comes to resolve of the Korean Peninsula issue. This is quite sincere, I would say, coming from the Chinese side, because the Chinese side has been working on this for a long, long time, beginning from the very beginning of the six-party talks. So, Mr. Zhao, here's the thing. What role can China still play? I put this question to Mr. Li Baodong earlier, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, but I do want to have your views as well.
Well, I think this statement is, sounds really positive and really important because, in fact, to be honest, there is different view among the Chinese scholarly community. Some people start to fear that maybe China is now kept out of the loop, China is no longer in control, and maybe Chinese interest could be negatively undermined by a direct U.S.-North Korea dialogue. They might have some secret agreement that counters Chinese interests. So a very positive statement from the president, I think, sends a very good signal, saying that China is really being very selfless in doing this. It is really for the benefits of peace and stability.
Right.
As long as dialogue can happen, differences can be resolved, tensions can be lowered, China is willing to play any role, either as a direct player or on the sideline to facilitate the dialogue. So I think that's a very important message.
Over the past 48 hours, this has been very exciting for many of us who've been following this issue for a long time. Mr. Walsh, I would assume the same for you, sir. But having said that, though, for now, Mr. Trump accepting this apparent invitation coming from the North Korean leader, Mr. Kim, to be meeting in May. According to the South Korean sources from the Blue House, it's likely to be in late May. We don't know yet. But the thing is, in preparation for this, will the United States be able to give out some positive signs so that the other side could also follow up suit and interact?
Well, I would hope so, and that's going to require flexibility on all the parties' parts. Let me say that my personal reaction to the news last night was I was simultaneously elated and horrified. To my colleagues' comments that some people will feel, are worried that this sort of summit might lead to the exclusion, of China's point of view, and you all, every time there's this sort of diplomacy, the parties in the region always they want you to have it, they want you to talk, and then when you start talking, they get nervous that they'll get left out. I do not think that's the danger here, and the reason why I am both elated and horrified is that obviously they have to talk at some point.
All right.
Obviously the solution to this is a political settlement, but if they meet and it goes badly, if it crashes and burns, then we can end up in a more dangerous situation than we are today.
But then, Mr. Walsh,
there's high risk and high reward.
But please, Mr. Walsh, do not get pessimistic before we get optimistic about it. Let's make the utmost efforts. I mean, finally, this day comes, whether it is really going to bring the real thing. We have to work hard for that. So, Mr. Walsh, here's the thing. What about South Korea and the United States? Obviously, at this point, you can see South Korea very eager to play a middleman role between the U.S. and North Korea. At the same time, as they say, blood is heavier than water. Of course, the North and the South could work in a common goal, that is the peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. The United States, though, probably have other things in mind. For example, its strategic interest, quote-unquote, in the region. So, Mr. Walsh, South Korea, the United States, how strong is that partnership?
Well, it's really gone back and forth in real major swings this year. There have been times when it's been very poor. You'll remember President Trump accused President Moon of being an appeaser and, seemed to be cozier with Japan and China than he was, and we don't have an ambassador. The U.S. has no ambassador in South Korea. So those are all negative points, but I must give President Moon a ton of credit here. He has been a very skillful tactician, and even though he, some other politicians might have gotten upset or insulted, he didn't handle it that way. He continued to try to cultivate Mr. Trump, and so I think he's proven himself to be far more skilled than his mentor. And you are right to say, Tian, that the U.S. interests are not exactly the same as South Korean interests, and I think Moon has been very skillful in taking the lead and really pushing for something that he sees as part of South Korea's future. So
yeah, how do you see?
That's what brought us to this point.
Okay, Mr. Zhao, how do you see what exactly is U.S. interest in the region when our American guests scratching their heads and say, we do not know, it's not clear? What about China's analysis, Mr. Zhao?
Well, I think U.S. has a clear interest in avoiding itself being threatened by a nuclear-capable North Korea. I would disagree with our American colleague in the sense that I don't see any risk, even if the summit meeting failed. Even if the two countries could not resolve their fundamental differences about North Korea's nuclear weapons, they can still achieve some other benefits.
Like what?
Like the U.S. could still use the talks to delay North Korea's further enhancements of its capabilities. Kim Jong Un promised not to continue with nuclear and missile tests as long as dialogue continues. And also they can seek other benefits, including making North Korea to better enforce its previous commitment of nuclear non-proliferation, how to make sure that it would not transport nuclear technologies or materials to any other third player. They can also talk about mutual understandings, what's the ultimate objectives of each other, to avoid basic misunderstandings. So when tensions are high again, the chances of misjudgment could be lower.
On the other hand, Mr. Zhao, I have to ask you about that too, about North Korea, the DPRK. Why is it proposing the meeting now? Why is it so sure that the United States and Washington just would not be able to afford to refuse? Mr. Zhao, how much does it have to do with the fact that the DPRK has already reached a certain level when it comes to nuclear weapons and its missile capabilities?
Yes, I think North Korea is now playing this game from a position of strength after already achieving a basic nuclear deterrent capability. So I think North Korea knows that the U.S. has to give diplomacy a shot because all the other options have been explored. I think going forward, as long as the summit meeting takes place, even if there is no concrete results, Kim Jong Un will gain a lot because this meeting will give him a lot of international recognition and legitimacy about its nuclear weapon programs. And I think Kim Jong Un might want to aim to achieve more because he might believe in his own personal chemistry, his own personal capability to talk President Trump into sympathizing with North Korea's nuclear ambition, and therefore making U.S. accept North Korea, keeping its existing capabilities for now, and to work on other small steps like freezing the program in the near-term future.
Okay, that is on the condition that this meeting is going to take place. But whether it is going to take place or not, we do not know. We only know there's an invitation. The other side accepts the invitation. They try to set a time, and nobody knows what's going to happen in between. From now on, a lot of things could happen. Joint military exercise between the United States and South Korea, even though the North Koreans said that they understand it is a routine, but we never know how they're going to react and how the U.S. going to, if manipulated in any way or not. We also do not know whether there are other things related to DPRK that would in a way lead to U.S. Change of attitude, whether for domestic politics or for their real strategic interests. All these are unknown, not to mention other places, Japan, China, Russia, and the others. So, Mr. Walsh, from now until if the meeting happens, what are we talking about here? Briefly, sir.
Well, I think it will happen. I really do believe. I hear your concerns, and we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves, but I think the meeting's going to happen. I think given the timeline, given the fact that the U.S. chief negotiator retired last week and that we don't have an ambassador in Seoul, then the U.S. has a lot of homework to do to try to work out what its policy is going to be. and then to try to talk to the president and educate him on what the dangers are, what the risks are, and what the opportunities are. So I think there's a lot of work to do between now and May.
All right. Before we go, Mr. Zhao, I also want to throw this question to you. The same thing. What's going to happen? How is China going to react to all kinds of situations? According to Chinese Vice Foreign Minister earlier, that China going to put the people together, let them talk, and let them talk. But here is the thing. China president talking to the U.S. president on the phone, they talk about focus on cooperation. Are we talking about the same thing here, Mr. Zhao? Very briefly.
Yes, I think President Xi said to President Trump that every side should avoid conducting destabilizing activities before the meeting can take place, which means maybe U.S. should consider refraining from conducting any additional unilateral sanctions against North Korea. In terms of the scheduled joint exercises, maybe the United States can scale down some of the most provocative elements of that, such as the decapitation practice against North Korean leaders.
All right.
Those efforts can guarantee that a good summit can take place in time.
Well, a lot of things could be done and should be done. Will they be done? That's the big question mark. But for now, I want to thank the two of you upon this, at least, good news for today. Zhao Tong, Jim Watt, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. And with that, we're coming to the end of today's program. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight, CGTN, into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and to everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next week for insights across China and around the world. The weekend is up. Have a great one, everyone.